Welcome to America, where landlords own the land, the sky, and apparently your soul. The housing market is a rigged casino, and guess what? You're not the house. You're the sucker at the table watching your wages disappear, while corporate landlords jack up rent just because they can. They've got the government in their back pockets, banks on speed dial, and a legal system designed to ensure they never lose. Meanwhile, you're playing real life Monopoly, but instead of collecting $200 when you pass go, you get a rent increase, then a condescending email about market conditions from some guy named Chad. Here's the thing: housing isn't a luxury, it's a basic human right. But in this dystopian comedy we call America, it's been transformed into a profit maximizing scheme where your suffering is just another revenue stream. And the people at the top love it that way. This isn't some radical fringe idea, it's survival. The only reason we have tenant protections is collective resistance. Rent strikes, mass organizing, and working class power forced landlords and politicians to bend, kicking and screaming, into passing rent control and eviction protections. History doesn't lie. Every time tenants have fought back, they've won something. And every time they've backed down, landlords have squeezed harder. So the question is, are you going to fight? Or are you going to just let some hedge fund treat your home like a slot machine? Because make no mistake, this isn't just about bad landlords, it's about power. And if you don't organize, the people who profit from your misery will keep rigging the game. America, where billionaires can hoard beachfront property while working people get fined for sleeping in their cars. And in this grand tradition of prioritizing rich people's feelings over basic human needs, we have landlord friendly rent strike laws. Let's break it down. If your landlord stops fixing the heat in January, lets black mold creep across the ceiling like an avant garde fungus experiment, and refuses to do anything about the cockroach fight club happening in your kitchen, you should be able to legally stop paying rent, right? Wrong. Because in this wonderful free market democracy, withholding rent for literally any reason is a great way to get yourself evicted faster than you can say, but what about my rights? Here's the scam: most states allow landlords to evict tenants for non payment, even if the unit is unlivable. You could be wading through sewage in your living room, and your landlord's legal response will be, well, did you pay the rent? Yes, Chad, but I also had to buy a hazmat suit just to use the bathroom. But Chad doesn't care. Chad has a loophole. And these legal loopholes let corporate landlords jack up rent just because they feel like it. No justification, no improvements, just pure unfiltered greed. Market conditions, they say. Supply and demand, they claim. No, it's extortion with extra steps. The worst part? If your neighbors decide to fight back, you might as well be planning a bank heist. Some states treat tenant organizing like a criminal conspiracy. You try to form a union, and suddenly your landlord pulls out the eviction notice like it's an Uno reverse card. You have the right to free speech, unless that speech is about not getting screwed on rent. You have the right to assembly, unless that assembly happens to be in the lobby of a building your landlord refuses to maintain. You have the right to petition, unless the petition is about fixing the damn plumbing. If you ever wonder why every major city has more real estate developers than affordable housing, the answer is courts treat landlords like delicate little flowers and treat tenants like criminals for expecting basic livable conditions. And the kicker? They don't even have to call the cops. They just let the lease expire and choose not to renew it. Boom. No more problem tenant. Hope you enjoy living in your car, Dave. They prioritize property rights over human rights. If corporations are people, then I demand that my apartment gets a social security number and the voting rights. They prevent tenants from exercising collective bargaining power. It's almost as if landlords don't want tenants to know that their rent payments could buy the entire building within 10 years. They allow landlords to profit off unsafe, inadequate housing while tenants face legal retaliation. You mean to tell me that the guy who afforded 3 vacation homes is struggling financially when one tenant refuses to pay their rat infested studio? Please. They call rent strikes illegal, like that's supposed to mean something. Slavery was legal. Jim Crow was legal. Not letting women vote was legal. So forgive me, but it's the law doesn't make me feel better about a system where billionaires own entire zip codes while single moms get evicted over $50 late fees. If laws exist solely to protect the wealth of landlords, then it's not the tenants breaking the law, it's the system itself that's illegitimate. And if the only way to fix an illegitimate system, you fight like hell. If landlords and politicians had their way, rent strikes would be a forgotten relic, buried next to the labor movement and the idea of a living wage. But history has a funny way of reminding us that when people fight back, they win. And when tenants refuse to be ignored, they become an existential crisis for the real estate industry. Picture this: post World War I New York. Soldiers are coming home. Inflation is eating wages alive. And landlords are acting like oil barons who just realized they can charge extra for breathing. Rent hikes were ruthless, with landlords jacking up prices 25 to 100% overnight. Tenants who at this point were one more rent increase away from losing their damn minds did what any rational person would do: they stopped paying. In 1919, thousands of working class tenants, many of them immigrants, organized a rent strike and demanded rent freezes and protections against arbitrary evictions. It worked. New York's first rent control laws were then born, and suddenly landlords weren't allowed to treat tenants like human ATMs. This was the first major rent strike victory in the US, and it proved that collective bargaining could kneecap landlord greed. Of course, landlords lost their mind. They acted like rent control was the first step toward full blown Bolshevism. But let's be real, they still got rich, just slightly less rich. Fast forward a few decades, and the rent strike evolved from an economic battle into a civil rights showdown. Harlem in the 1960s was a landlord's dream. Low income black tenants trapped in slum housing where landlords could raise rents while ignoring things like heating, plumbing, and the existence of a front door. Black tenants were systematically denied access to better housing, while white tenants were courted with incentives. The free market at work, folks. But Harlem tenants weren't about to let greedy landlords and racist housing policies win. So they organized. Tenant unions formed, rent strikes erupted, and suddenly landlords found themselves facing actual consequences. The strikes forced the city to address housing discrimination, but not before the media tried to frame it as issue of dirty apartments instead of a racist predatory landlord. The result? Legal changes that forced the landlords to maintain their properties, at least on paper. But more importantly, it proved that rent strikes weren't just about money, they were about justice. If you thought we left predatory landlords in the 20th century, I have some very bad news for you. Kansas City, 2024. Tenants at Independence Towers decided enough was enough. Their landlord had jacked up rents while refusing to fix anything, so they did what history told them actually works. They went on a rent strike. Landlords could have fixed the damn buildings and kept their tenants, but nope. Instead, they doubled down and hiked rents even higher. Why? Because the entire housing system is built to punish resistance. The second tenants flex their power, landlords get spooked and do everything in their power to break the strike. Evictions, legal threats, media spin, whatever it takes. But here's though that landlords don't want people to realize. The more tenants organize, the harder it becomes to ignore them. Every single major rent control law in this country exists because people refused to pay for their own exploitation. Rent strikes work. And the people in power are terrified that you'll find that out. Landlords love isolated, terrified tenants. They kind of get a rent hike and just accept it like a bad sequel to an already terrible movie. They want you to believe that fighting back is futile, that organizing is useless, and that you're lucky to even have a place to live at all. Enter tenant unions, the landlord's worst nightmare. A tenant union is a collective fuck off to landlord exploitation. It's a way for renters to flip the power dynamic because one tenant complaining is an annoyance, but an entire building refusing to pay? That's a crisis. Here's how tenant unions flip the script. 1. Organize renters to negotiate collectively. Instead of getting steamrolled individually, tenants can unite and force landlords to face the whole damn building at once. Imagine trying to evict an entire complex worth of tenants while dodging bad press and legal challenges. It's an expensive headache that landlords don't want. 2. Provide legal and financial resources to tenants facing eviction. Landlords rely on scaring tenants into submission, using eviction threats like cops use parking tickets, constantly and without remorse. Tenant unions arm renters with legal resources, connect them with lawyers, and sometimes even cover legal fees. Suddenly, that eviction notice isn't so scary. 3. Push for legislative changes to protect renters. Tenant unions don't just fight individual landlords, they fight the system that enables them. By lobbying for stronger rent control, stronger eviction protections, and tenant friendly policies, they force cities to put actual laws in place so slumlords can't keep running the same scam. Landlords love to say tenant unions don't work, but history says otherwise. When Chicago landlords started throwing out tenants like yesterday's junk mail, the Autonomous Tenants Union stepped in. They blocked evictions, pressured landlords into making repairs, and forced slumlords to follow the law. Imagine that. Landlords actually being held accountable for their actions. New York's tenant unions weren't just complaining about high rent, they were shutting down landlords. Their organizing efforts led to some of the strongest rent control laws in the US. forcing landlords to justify rent hikes instead of just increasing prices whenever they felt like buying a new yacht. California's landlords spent years pretending like rent control was communism, but tenant unions fought back. The result? Rent caps, anti eviction laws, and some of the strongest tenant protections in the country. Tenant organizing isn't just a city by city fight anymore. The Tenant Union Federation is connecting renters across states, turning isolated tenants into a national war against landlord greed. Landlords hate unions for the same reason bossers hate labor unions. Because they level the playing field. The second tenants start negotiating collectively, landlords lose their biggest weapon: divide and conquer. Because here's the thing: rent isn't high because landlords are struggling. Rent is high because they know they can get away with it. And tenant unions, they make sure that landlords can't get away with it anymore. So, you and your neighbors are fed up. You're sick of paying luxury prices for apartments that have all the charm of a motel crime scene. You're done financing your landlord's third vacation home while your ceiling develops a sentient mold colony. It's time to fight back. A rent strike isn't just a bold middle finger to landlord greed, it's a strategic tool that has won actual victories for tenants. But pulling one off takes more than just refusing to Venmo Chad for the rent. So, here's how to build a rent strike that actually works. Step 1: build tenant solidarity. A one person rent strike is just an eviction waiting to happen. The first step is organizing your neighbors. Start talking to tenants who share the same grievances you hold. Have tenant meetings to discuss common issues like skyrocketing rent, neglected repairs, infestations that require a flamethrower to handle. Gauge interest. If no one else is on board, rethink your approach. If enough tenants are fed up, then it's time to move forward. The goal is numbers. Landlords can evict one person easily, but dozens or hundreds? That's a legal and PR nightmare. Research laws. Landlords love legal loopholes more than they love never responding to maintenance requests. Before launching a rent strike, know what your rights are. Some cities like New York City, San Francisco, and LA protect collective rent strikes, meaning landlords can't retaliate easily. Others, not so much. Some states let landlords fast track evictions for non payment, even if they're the ones creating slum conditions. If your area has legal protections, great. You have leverage. If it doesn't, you need to prepare for retaliation. And you should probably start by asking your state representatives why they're catering to slumlords. Step 3: negotiate collectively. Before you go full on, hell no, we won't pay, try formal negotiations. Draft a list of demands from the meetings you've had. Reasonable things like repairs, fair rent, or not being forced to live in a collapsing death trap. Present it to the landlord as a unified group. If a landlord ignores or dismisses the demands, that is when the strike starts. Rent strikes work best when the landlord refuses to negotiate. Step 4: create a rent escrow account. This is the legal shield that stops a rent strike from turning into a mass eviction. Instead of just not paying rent, tenants deposit their rent money into an escrow account. This proves that tenants aren't freeloading, they're withholding payment until the landlord meets their demands. In cities with tenant protections, this blocks landlords from evicting tenants for non payment. Escrow, essentially, is a legal, we're not paying you, but the money is still here kind of loophole. Step 5. Amplify through media. Landlords hate bad PR. A well publicized rent strike can force them to the negotiating table faster than a lawsuit. Contact local journalists, activists, and tenant rights organizations. Use social media videos of rats in the walls to go viral way faster than a legal filing. Organize protests, call out the landlord by name, and make the issue so loud they can't ignore it. The bigger the public pressure, the harder it is for landlords to retaliate. Landlords aren't just going to sit back and let this happen. Expect dirty tactics, harassment, and intimidation. Common landlord retaliation moves include eviction notices. Even in protected cities, landlords will find reasons to kick out striking tenants. Harassment, unannounced inspections, sudden emergency repairs, or just making life hell. Blacklisting. Landlords can add striking tenants to do not rent list, making it harder for them to find housing later. How to fight back. You document everything. Every small repair request, every shady landlord move should be recorded and timestamped. Use local tenant protections. Some cities make retaliatory evictions illegal. Push for stronger laws. Rent strikes should just win short term gains, they should lead to long term legal protections. The second tenants realize they have collective power, the whole game changes. Every major rent control law in the US has come from tenants refusing to pay for their own exploitation. Landlords want you to feel powerless, but the second enough tenants organize, they panic. Because if you stop paying for their third yacht, what happens? They lose. And that's exactly why they don't want you to strike. Let's be real. If rent strikes were ineffective, landlords wouldn't be trying so damn hard to make them illegal. The fact that mere idea of tenants organizing sends a real estate developers into a cold sweat should tell you everything. Rent strikes have worked before. They've forced landlords to negotiate, secured rent control laws, and won better living conditions. But more than that, they've proven that only real counter to landlord power is tenant solidarity. Because here's the brutal truth: landlords rely on tenant isolation. They count on you being too afraid to fight back, too convinced that you have no power, too worried about retaliation to take action. They know that as long as tenants feel alone, they can keep doing what they've always done: raising rents, dodging repairs, and treating working people like walking ATMs. That's why tenant unions are the biggest threat to landlord dominance. The laws that criminalize rent strikes weren't written to protect tenants. They were written to ensure landlords never lose. If the system truly cared about fairness, then withholding rent for unlivable conditions wouldn't be illegal. Eviction wouldn't be a weapon landlords could use at will. Landlords wouldn't be able to raise rent arbitrarily while ignoring repairs. Instead, tenants who organize are punished, while slumlords rake in the profits. That is not justice. That is systemic theft. The truth is, rent strikes are one of the few tools tenants have to fight back against an industry that's designed to bleed them dry. If you've ever panicked over a rent increase, if you've ever had to choose between food and rent, if you've ever watched your landlord ignore your repair requests while they drive around in a brand new luxury car, then you already know the system isn't built for you. So here's the choice: either organize or remain at the mercy of an exploitative system. We either fight back or accept that landlords can raise your rent whenever they feel like funding a new vacation home. Housing is not a privilege, it's a human right. And rights aren't granted by those in power, they're won by those who refuse to back down. This is a war for basic human dignity. Rent is high because landlords are choosing to do this. It's high because they know they can get away with it. Tenant unions change that. Rent strikes change that. Collective resistance changes that. So what's it going to be? Are we going to accept the scam and keep paying into an unjust system? Or are we going to stand up, fight back, and take back what's ours? Because housing isn't a privilege, it's a human right. And rights aren't given, they're taken. Eyes open, voices loud,